focused on lake sturgeon, monitoring of methyl mercury, PCB, heavy metals, and pesticides in fish tissues in Mishkangwa Council's traditional territory, investigating the impact of clear cutting, abandoned and existing mines on fish habitat and water quality, and monitoring of aquatic biodiversity and fish health around existing and potential industrial projects. Dr. Littenoff's experience includes training First Nations youth in fisheries and aquatic invertebrates assessment techniques, water quality monitoring, and fisheries management. In the middle is Bertha Sutherland, Constance Lake First Nation. Bertha Sutherland, mother of two girls, Rhiannon, 3 years old, and Heather, 15 years old. Bertha practices her traditional beliefs, smudge, attending ceremonies, to name a few. Bertha has a forestry and health administration and economic development background. She currently works for her community of Constance Lake as a First Nation land use planning coordinator for 3 years. Bertha enjoys the great outdoors and traveling, and being with family and friends is an important part of her life. Okay. Last year is Carolyn Whitaker, the Firelight Group. Carolyn Whitaker, Master of Science, is a founding director of Firelight Group Research Cooperative and has facilitated numerous marine and land use planning and monitoring processes in Canada and the U.S. Caroline leads the Firelight Group's ecology research area. Her work with Firelight focuses on applying traditional ecological knowledge research in management processes, including environmental assessment, land and marine planning, and community-based monitoring. Recent relevant work includes developing community-based management plans and monitoring programs for culturally important species and ecosystems in Canada, facilitating a provincial process to develop criterion and indicators for ecosystems at risk in BC, conducting marine use research and planning with coastal nations in British Columbia, environmental assessment and regulatory review with First Nations on the BC coast. In her work with Firelight's regulatory team, Carolyn has provided technical reviews of several proposed marine and foreshore developments.
So I got it working, it's going into the camera, no problem. But when I just take the other Y cable and plug it into the wall, it shows the signal, and I can't get it to go anywhere. And they would decide to keep going anyway. So I'm just going to give them the mic, it goes into the camera. I don't know why it's working. When I plug it in the wall jack, like I turned it up on the in the cabinet, it's just not going. And where they're not giving us time to fix it. So as long as I can get them.
Only for camera. Okay, I will be speaking a little bit louder. Well, welcome to seats, ladies and gentlemen. We'll start our panel discussion. I hope my English much better than your Russian, so you will understand me. How you hear my accent, I'm originally from Siberia. I was born and grew up in Siberia. And my family moved to Canada in 1998. And since then, I'm working with First Nation communities and different agencies, solving some management miscarriages and investigating some stuff around fisheries, mostly fisheries. Well, I got my fisheries degree from Russia, Astrakhan Technical University, and I got my PhD also from Russia, St. Petersburg, it's State Research Institute of Fisheries. So all my life I'm working with fish and aquatic stuff. So you can ask any questions about aquatic stuff, me, and we got terrestrial biologist here. I'll just pass my stuff.
Hello. Can't hear. Oh, okay. Oh. Okay, okay, I've been working for my community for about 5 years, working on the land use planning, and also we've completed our terms of reference, and at the moment we're working towards our designation of our area of interest. So that's where we are today, and one of the what do you call those things here? Subjects, okay, is species at risk. So I've been doing that for almost 2 years, species at risk. We've been working on the caribou work. So we've hired Miss Carolyn Whitaker to assist us in that, since she's the biologist. So so that's where we are today. That's one of our subjects that is our species at risk. And I know when Dr. Pearson was talking about climate change, that also is another priority of our community, is the climate change issue. So for now, I'll just leave it at that, and I'll get Carolyn to talk about what she talks about.
Thank you. First of all, I would say thanks for having me here, and thanks to the Fort Williams First Nation for hosting us on the land, and for everyone that organized the conference. I was here last year, and it was a really valuable experience to hear the exchanges of information and discussion about community knowledge. So my role here in this area, in this territory, I've been doing work in the boreal on mostly on caribou, but on other ungulates as well. So we've been doing studies on caribou boreal, the woodland caribou, as well as on changes in other species. So I think Arlene said it this morning. She said that climate change is affecting all of us, all of the animals and fish. And so we've been focusing on some of the terrestrial species and looking at changes that are happening quite quickly. So, you know, the caribou shift was something that within living memory, people can remember there being lots of caribou. You know, some of the folks that are elders now talk about seeing lots and lots of caribou, and now when you go out, it's very rare that you'll see one. And then we're also noticing other really important species like moose starting to shift. So the work that we do is focusing on traditional knowledge, and one of the reasons is because Western science isn't very good at backcasting. It's really good at telling you what's happening right now, but it's not very good at telling us what happened in over 100 years, or how the trends and changes in things. And the traditional knowledge is very good at helping us to understand those changes over time. And there was a few speakers that mentioned that today, how important the knowledge of the elders is to helping us understand our history and what's happening. So I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I'll just start the question period now. So our first question to the panelists is, sorry, afterwards there'll be additional time for your own question and answers. These are just some generic ones to start the conversation, get ideas flowing, okay? What funding have you applied for, and which were you most successful with in regards to species at risk projects within First Nation community?
It's me again. Okay. Maybe I should talk about Mishkegawak territory and my experience working with Mishkegawak Environmental Research Center. It's a little bit different experience I got than working with Moose Cree First Nation, because right now I'm working on Land and Resources Department. It's more like management unit. But before that, I was working for research center. So I worked from 2008 until 2013. We applied almost a year, every year in different agencies, and most success we got it's with Health Canada. Because Health Canada it's a little bit different than MNR grant application and all requirements for research projects. For MNR, they're mostly looking for multi-year studies, and their funds, if they even say we got $250,000 for research, and when we try to apply, usually they give us only $15,000. And you understand it's not possible to make a really sound research program for $15,000 a year. Because mostly it's money they already claim they have. It's already signed out for another programs, multi-year. So if you, for example, will apply in the future for SARA, it's specific. Every year they say, okay, we got SARA. Grant money, just give a call person who is responsible for this grant and ask how much money left for this research. Next step, it's my advice that I already gone through this way many times. Make multi-year program. Multi-year. And when they got multi-year program, maybe when some program will expire, they will fit you in. So maybe not first year, but second year, you will be in. For Health Canada, it's completely different. Usually, they approve our research projects because it's year to year. And if you present a really good grant or proposal that involves several communities, usually they're more acceptable for this kind of proposals. Plus, you have to identify goals. In my experience, also, Environment Canada, it's very good with proposals from First Nation communities. So, federal government's more like forthcoming with money than Ontario government, from my experience. I cannot say that I didn't get money from Ontario government, but it's mostly something like one day I got a phone call from office from Peterborough, and they say, oh, you're familiar with this area, we have money for study lake sturgeon in this area, could you help us? Yes, I will help you. But it's completely different of any legal framework for any grants. So, but if you apply for SARA, you can get some money, but in my experience, I didn't get more than $15,000. And for this kind of money, I usually collect TEK. Coming to communities and collecting TEK, traditional ecological knowledge. It gave me some answers. What's the priority for First Nation communities? Area of concerns, what community goals, and some perspectives for future studies. So this is my experience. I don't want to spend so much time talking. Maybe Berta will explain some.
Okay, for our community, we applied to Species at Risk program, which we received. It wasn't that much. We had to cut down on some areas. We had to, they always ask us to do some in-kind, so which is basically my time that I've included. So we just do the basic, okay, like when we first got the funding, we only did the ATK, we did the interviews with the elders. We asked them what happened in the past. So that's mostly the information that we've got the first year of from the stewardship funding for Species at Risk. And it wasn't that much, but we still managed to do what we did. And so we went into the second phase we were applying for, So we applied to the Aboriginal species at risk, which we got also, which was like 48. And that was the work that we went out to the field. The first one was in like interviewing with the elders, and the second one for this year we went out in the field. We went about 2 times. The first one was to set up the cameras, and the second time was when Carolyn and the other biologist came in, Susan. So they wanted to go check up the cameras and to make sure if there was any signs of caribou or if any other animals or what's out there. So that's what we got. So now this year, they sent an email out saying that, okay, there's money again for species at risk, and like, I don't know how many times we're going to apply for it. I'm not sure if we could only limit to one species, or once you do one species, do you have to do another one? So that's where we are right now. We don't know which species to work with, either continue with the caribou or go with the wolverine. Like, we're not sure yet, though. I still need to meet with our council just to be unsure if this is where we want to go. So that's where we are today. Is we're still working at some of our this year funding for the Aboriginal species at risk.
Thanks, Bertha. So as Bertha was mentioning, for a lot of these, especially the provincial funding, it's a lot of work. The applications, I'm sure you guys have all filled out those application forms for the province and the feds. There's a lot of reporting involved. I think they're trying to streamline it, but the more they do to streamline it, sometimes it even creates more work. And it's not a lot of money. And we have to apply for matching funding. So some of the places that we've gone for matching funding are Habitat Conservation Trust funds, Environmental Damages Fund, so the federal government, foundations. So we've gone to Pew Trust, the Wilberforce Foundation, and then there's sometimes industry funding. So sometimes you can use industry, can approach businesses that are operating in the territory and approach them to match the funding for the ATK studies. So we've had some success with that in some of the areas that we've been working. Sometimes the industry funding comes with strings attached that you don't necessarily want. For example, they want data, and sometimes you don't necessarily want to share the data with them. So, it takes consciously making sure there's a good information protocol agreement in place if you're going to take that money, but it can be good as a matching fund. I think that's it.
I just want to ask if anyone from the back wants to move their chairs up, because I know you guys can't hear very well. There's nothing more we can do. The mic's not working, so if you want to move your chairs up.
Do you want us to move on?
Yeah. Are there any questions about what they just went through? Mary, first? Or?
Is the Health Canada funding usually on food?
Yes. Okay. It's more like because local community use lake sturgeon like a food source.
Yeah.
So it's a bigger concern level of contamination in the fish tissue, and plus we got mid-Canada line, some bases, traditional territory of some species, some First Nation communities. They also have some concerns. What's the level of PCB, mercury? Mercury is naturally high level, but plus it's all industrial activities, hydro development. They kind of interested to see, and this data was incorporated in food advisory for all Ontario. So, but mostly it's like for community use health information.
Nobody's done anything yet on, say, sites of medicinal plants that might be in an area that could be contaminated, or animal food plants.
It's a little bit outside of my expertise.
I mean, I can comment a little bit on that, but well understood.
Yeah.
Especially for medicinal plants and the transfer into consumption. So, but there are specific studies being done on, say, berries and things like that.
It was actually done comprehensive study for Mid-Canada line around Abitibi relay. So 16 site? Yeah, it was collected plants, animals, fish, water, even sediments and sea groundwater to see how it's PCB spread from this location to more clean sites. Because this was cleanup right now going on in Ontario for all these sites.
I just had a quick question. I mean, there used to be an abundance, well, not an abundance, but there used to be funding for fisheries work, fisheries habitat work. Sort of dried up. I wonder if you've heard anything about whether that funding.
Oh, it was a federal program, Aboriginal Inland Habitat Program, until 2011, I think. And federal government, Harper, thank you very much. He decided it's too expensive, $2 million a year for all Canada is too expensive to keep this program afloat. So he discontinued it. So DFO right now, not in a picture. I was trying to get some answers from DFO about fish habitat protection, James Bay, Hudson Bay. I got zero response. I got 0 people working on James Bay. No people. They close all offices all over northeastern Ontario. So it's kind of no funds available, unfortunately, right now from DFO especially.
I had a question. I work with Environment Canada, so I'm familiar with some of the species at risk, but more importantly, well, not more importantly, but I'm more familiar with the benthic work that you've done for us along the Attawapaskat. And I know in all those contracts, the government wants to have some ownership of it, but what do the communities do there? Like, what sort of guidance do you use to protect your own information in terms of intellectual property?
Okay, we just got new grant money for Ring of Fire baseline studies, and a special clause in the agreement, like we share all information with Environment Canada, Ministry of Environment, MNR, and Ministry of Development of Mines, MMDM. This is only biological data. Biological data has become a public domain. Traditional ecological knowledge is completely different picture. It's a completely different story. With all my work that I collected traditional ecological knowledge, I have special clause in agreement. This I will share with ministry or specific people from ministry only summary. No actual data. For example, I'll say, this is how many people we interviewed, how many was male, female, age, something like that. But in general, summary, for example, lake sturgeon population in specific area under stress because of hydro development. Or this area is not suitable for fish harvest because fish really poisonous. Something like that. General information. No specific information about spawning habitat, spawning time, or spawning population. It's not shared with MNR. It's kept by community and used only by community. Even I cannot take it. I cannot publish it. I collect it, but I cannot take it to anybody. I cannot even advocate to apply to community to get this information. So it's specific requirements for data sharing, specific requirements for data keeping and storage and all this stuff. So this is only, I can say that I can share biological data with everybody because I get return biological data from a ministry, but traditional ecological knowledge is completely different zone.
When we collect our information, we keep it. When we did the study for the caribou, we had two different reports. We had one that was confidential just to the community, the chief and council, and the other one was for our funding, where we got our funding from. So we just kind of put a big blob, say, okay, yeah, there's information here. But on the other one, we go into in depth with the chief and council. We show them exactly where everything is. So that's anything, any information that we've gathered, we have to get, the chief and council have to, they ensure that that information is protected. So that's why we always have an agreement or how the information is going to be shared so that it doesn't go into the wrong hands. So they're very protective of the information that we've gathered. So right now, it's we have it on. I have it on my computer. I have it on the any backup data on the external hard drive. So that's how we keep our information. So.
Well, Bertha just explained to you sort of, because we're working as a technical support with the community, the way that the Firelight cooperative works is that we partner with the community researchers, so we work directly with the folks that are doing data collection, and we work for the community, and the community owns the data, so we don't actually produce reports unless we're asked to, and we're in the information sharing, it tells us exactly which type of data and information the community would like to share. So in the case of the caribou, people weren't comfortable sharing that traditional knowledge, and so we didn't put any maps or anything out. We just wrote some general trends and descriptive data that was approved to be shared. In general, I think it is important to use the data to the maximum possible. So, understanding, so in a lot of the contexts that we work in, the province or the federal government will manage species based on a broader range. And communities have very different goals and objectives within that range, and they often will be working within a traditional territory or a preferred hunting area or a trap line. And this was proven by West Moberly First Nation in British Columbia, where a coal company went in and they wanted to develop a specific site that was important for caribou. And the community said, no, that's important caribou habitat. And the province used this, and the feds, the province and the federal government both used this argument, well, there's lots of other places for them to go, and we're looking at the range, and they're sustainable across the range. And West Moberly said, but they're not in our territory. And we have a right to protect that species in our traditional territory. And they went to court, so the province allocated the certificate to the mine. West Moberly went to court and they won an injunction to stop the mine in that caribou habitat based on it being important within their traditional territory. But the challenge of managing that information is that the province will use it for a different purpose, and the federal government, again, will use it for a different purpose. And so the community, you have to know what your goal is for your information and how you want to make decisions based around it before sharing it. And be clear about what it is going to mean as far as the management decisions that you want to make for that data.
We got pretty healthy lake sturgeon population, with exception some river systems. For example, Matagami, we got quite a cascade of hydro development back to 1930s, and it's some population under stress, but mostly in northeastern Ontario we got really healthy lake sturgeon population. I found some species in Albany River system. It's called blackfin cisco. It's also a threatened species for all Ontario, but I found a local population in one of tributaries of Albany River. In 2006-2007, Merck was investigated some population of beluga whale in James Bay and Hudson Bay, close to mid-Canada line. Plus, woodland caribou was also a species of concern for local communities, and polar bear population. We got 2,000 polar bears close to Arawapiskat and Pewanik. So this is mostly species included in a list of species of concerns. About marine species, we don't know. Nobody even tried to start investigate James Bay and Hudson Bay for marine species that are under threat and any other. Based on my collection of TK again, we got Greenland shark in the James Bay. Not big population, but some population. It's kind of also threatened species, and actually it's international. But nobody knows what size of population. Nobody investigates this area, unfortunately. So,
Okay, for our concerns for our community was the caribou right now, but now we're talking about, because we had a meeting last week with our joint planning team for the land use planning, and we had Natural Heritage come in and do a presentation. They showed us this very colorful map, and they showed us all these different animals, amphibians, and all these plants, strange plants that are here now that were not here before. So I know there's two areas within our area of interest that has these natural heritage plots. So that was the first time I seen that map. I've never seen it before, and I know one of them is always on there, Jog Lake. I've seen that before, but the other ones, the other 6, I haven't seen. So I was kind of curious, like, how did they get there? Or did somebody just decide, okay, this is a special area? So that was my question to the two presenters that came in, like, how did you decide to make these areas a protected area or some kind of natural? Is there something there that's significant? So that was one of the questions we asked, and also we talked about, one of the members was talking heavily on moose. Moose is declining, and they were saying that we're going further and further and further away to go hunt. And before we never used to go that far, but now he's saying that, like, I used to see a lot of moose, and now you have a hard time getting one. So now that's what his concern was. Like, our moose is slowly, like, where they're going, and that's what his concern was. And we also are saying that too. We don't hardly see any bats. Maybe they are around, but there's not as many there was before. And bees, they notice there's a decline in bees. So, like, I mean, these are, maybe they're a nuisance, but they do a purpose in the cycle. So that's what's missing. That's what we don't see that much of. So right now, that's what we're kind of trying to figure out, okay, what's going on. So then we're thinking, okay, maybe climate change. So that's the ones that we're actually thinking about right now, is the bats, the bees, and the wolverine right now. Is kind of concerning for us.
Thanks. Just to pick up on Bertha's comment that the species at risk are designated by a team of scientists at the provincial level, and even though it's in their mandate to consider Aboriginal knowledge in making those decisions, they don't. And they're also not considering community cultural goals and perspectives in how they decide on the protected areas, right? So what's coming up in more of our work is that, okay, the caribou have gone down in the Constance Lake territory, but it's okay because there's still moose. But the moose are going down. If you look at the territory, the province could say, well, that's okay, moose maybe they're just moving a little bit further into different areas, but they're still common and abundant. So they're not listed as a species at risk. But there's not going to be food left. There's going to be some deer, maybe. But there's so much reliance on sustainability for livelihoods and for harvesting. It's not okay to say that moose can decline across that territory as long as they're available somewhere else, because we can't afford to go somewhere else to get that food. And it's not being looked at the right scale. So first of all, when they look at those species, they're not looking at them at the right scale, and they're also not looking at the right species. So we applied for funding last year to do some work on moose because it's going down quite quickly, and we didn't get the funding. Probably because it's not a priority at the provincial scale, right? So this is where it's really challenging to identify culturally important species. Somebody mentioned earlier some medicinal plants or traditional food plants. Berries could be very available across a whole range, but they may be going down in areas that are accessible in a community. And that could be very, very important and have a huge impact. So it's important to consider cultural values and cultural importance of species in what is selected, and it's not being done. So.
Can I just go into question number 3?
Sure.
Are your projects in line with funders' ideas and criteria?
So, as Bertha was saying, we can cross-check what we identify as culturally important species against the province's list. But when it comes down to protecting values, so this is something that was raised in the first session, in the goal-setting session, protecting values and sustaining livelihoods, you can't accomplish that through the way that species at risk are currently being managed, because you can't identify those species that are part of your livelihood and get funding to research them in your community and understand what's happening to them in your territory, because it doesn't match up with the way that the province and the federal government are looking at the species at risk.
Well, actually, Moose Cree First Nation never applied for SARA because we will be rejected anyway. I can tell you why. To study lake sturgeon population in Moose Cree territory, it's outside of SARA objectives. It's mostly Great Lakes watershed and basin for Great Lakes. It's first priority. And population, lake sturgeon population in Moose Cree territory, it's concerned. It's not threatened, it's self-sustained, so nobody interested to study. Plus, we got a very unique lake sturgeon population that live in Ontario, but going to spawn in Quebec and come back to Ontario. So we got like 2 provincial legislations about the species at risk. Plus, we got very unique lake sturgeon population that Ontario didn't recognize. So, so far, our projects we're doing ourselves by using our own money, and our administration was smart enough to put some clause in any IBA agreement for future environmental studies. So we got some money coming from industry we can use for research. In this case, our projects are in line in general with SARA species mandate to protect species, but bottom line, they don't care about our populations, SARA species populations, because we have at least self-sustained populations right now. When we become in trouble, it's maybe they will change their mind, but not right now. So some kind of discouraging to hear it, but guys, if you apply for MNR SARA money, please check what area of priorities they have, because sometimes they got some special area of priorities that will be going in the first. So if you apply, like we did a couple of times apply, but they say you will not get funded because we got more urgent projects to finance. So.
Any questions from anyone? Did you develop a field study program using First Nation perspectives, or is it a partnership with another person or organization and their?
Short answer, yes. Well, it's our mandate to work with First Nation communities on their priorities, and if it's a shared or buffered area, we trying to get involved in other community too. For example, if I study Lake Sturgeon in Albany River, usually it's Kasheshewan and Fort Albany get involved. If I study some Lake Sturgeon in south part of James Bay, it's mostly Moose, Cree, and Wagashik. Wagashik and Washkaganish, from Quebec and south. So most. Plus, if some area for study Lake Sturgeon, it's also include TTN, Takwa Nation. So usually we make a joint project for all communities together, and we just divided area of interest for each community. So it's a lot of logistical work, a lot of politics involved, but it's best way to do it, and do it this way. Because meanwhile, I'm training some people from local communities, and next time I came, I already do have some network of people who can work with me. It's saving me time and money. So, and also I can call and say, could you collect information from this area? And people usually say yes. So it's good. Cooperation, it's good.
I would say, yeah, we're working with partnership. The funding that we got from the Aboriginal funding species at risk in the Ontario Steward species at risk, we went with partnership with Firelight to, because some of the application is really, you have to have a qualified biologist, because it says right on the app there that who's your contact person. And so I know the first time when we first applied, we were not approved because we didn't have that. So now we've applied. So now we had the Firelight the group assist us. So that's why we've received funding, because they're a qualified biologist, I guess. But the work that we do, when we work with them, we have some of our communities that also assist in collecting data, and we have the elders, and we also have the youth to be part of the collection, because they need to know which species are we're referring to, and for them it's like they hear stories from their grandparents, and like this is what we've seen in the past, and then sometimes they wonder what happened. So that's why we've always wanted to include the young ones and the elders. I don't want to say old. So, like, I mean, it's sometimes it's. I find sometimes my work, it's. I love doing what I'm doing. At the same time, too, I get frustrated with these funding. I mean, with the applications. They give you the runaround sometimes, or the turnaround is not. It's not that great. There's a turnaround that maybe I'll say, oh, 45 days, but by then it's already too late. So sometimes that's my beef sometimes. So, but other than that, we have a good relationship with the Firelight Group and any industries that we have agreements with. They always try to make a portion within the agreement that we have ATK, and that any work that needs to be done to be included. Because I know just not too long ago, with this big thing with the caribou line that's coming into the below the line of where most of the companies are, there was a big talk about this a while back in the winter, and they're trying to do a study about moving that line because it's too close to where our I guess the companies, I guess, or the companies want to cut or whatever. But I mean, there's sometimes lines are drawn when it shouldn't be, and then people get all excited and they tend to say nasty things sometimes. But other than that, you just have to do the best you can. And I know I went to that meeting, and there was a lot of angry people. People were upset that the government was in front, and they really couldn't say anything. Kind of felt sorry for them, but so that's my. But you just need to have good work ethics and good when you work with your companies or any agreement that you have that it's built on trust and built on good ethics, I guess, work ethics.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is that the way that we in our research cooperative, I mean, we're partly First Nations owned too, but we see the traditional knowledge and the knowledge holders as experts, and they're expert ecologists in traditional knowledge, and it's its own recognized and valid knowledge system. And then our technical support is a partnership, and it's important to respect the knowledge holders and the people that are the experts on that land base, and to create an opportunity for that knowledge to be transitioned to youth as well, to make sure that when we are doing the work, so when we put these applications in for budgets, there's a small piece of technical support for that biology role, but then there's a large budget for the community knowledge holders and as much engagement as possible with the youth as well. And we had some great interaction with the youth last year. They were doing some projects in their school, in their classrooms about caribou, as well as participating in going out on the land. And it can be used as a really great opportunity to get that connection around those key culturally important species.
Are there other species at risk, or just species, I guess, you consider interesting for future work?
Cliff?
Yeah, it was kind of almost tough.
Okay, well, I will continue collecting baseline data for Lake Sturgeon in northeastern Ontario because without baseline data, it's almost impossible to make management decisions after that. I got discussion with chief of Fort Albany First Nation about some hydro development on Albany River. And I told him, you know what, if you need silver bullet to kill this project, I do have in my pocket. Because area that try to build a dam, it's nursery habitat for Lake Sturgeon. So it's totally out of questions. No way I will approve it. But without baseline data, it's impossible to make any decisions, management decisions. Well, I will encourage you guys to do some baseline data, collecting distribution of species at risk, habitat description, to find critical habitat for species, to find some winter habitat, nursery for species at risk. So this is most important area that you have to focus your work. And this is my actually will be future work. Plus, I'm planning to do some James Bay inventory study. Hopefully I'll get some money for my department to see maybe we do have marine species at risk. So it will be also. Also, it's most important to me to see relationship between species at risk and invasive species. We got quite a few species that move in our territory, and consequences, ecological consequences, still unclear. So we don't know how it will affect Lake Sturgeon community, how it will affect ecosystem. Plus, we got all bunch of questions about existing projects and future projects in our area. So unfortunately, I got only 2 hands, and we got so much work to do. Well, in the future, it's for marines, for aquatic species, I will be working. Unfortunately, I cannot work on the terrestrial studies. I have no idea how it's working. Maybe you should explain. Terrestrial studies. Species you interested in.
Okay, are there any species you're interested in? Okay, we're probably gonna, I'm really not sure. I know we've always wanted to talk about the caribou, but I'm always stressing on, I don't know why bats. It's just that I'm looking at bats or the wolverine right now that I'm thinking of. I know there's a lot of studies on caribou, and there's not too many on some of the species that we don't see as much. But I know just a couple weeks ago, they're going to be doing some studies on some ATK on medicinal plants, and they're trying to. There's this project that's going to be going by our community, and they want to find out if there's any medicinal plants that are might go by the transmission line. So that's another project that I'm going to be working with the liaison worker, just to find out what types of questions they're asking, because I really don't know what is it they're looking for, because I haven't, they've talked about it, but they haven't asked me specifically any information. I told them I have information, and whatever information you want to see, please let me know. I'll try to help you as much as I can, but the information would have to stay here. I cannot release any information. So that's the only thing that's where it is, and no one has contacted me regarding medicinal plants, because I know we did a lot of that work about 2 years ago, plotting and GPSing and taking pictures of them, and so we do have plants and that the community still use. So I'm just waiting right now. So, but for now, with the species, I think I might move my focus to bats or wolverine for at the moment.
So aside from the ones that Berth has identified, we also have done in the Boreal studies on moose, where we did actually get funding. It was from industry, not from the government, but we did get some funding to look at moose declines. Migratory birds are in some, so the interesting thing about migratory birds, again, they're still migrating, they're still passing by, but sometimes they're shifting. So, if you go into the same place to hunt them every year and then you go back there, they're not there. So that's happened to a few of our communities that we've worked in, where the migratory birds just aren't coming through where they used to come through. So understanding that, I'm doing some work on bison out west, and then medicinal plants. The medicinal plant work Bertha mentioned, it's very challenging, because most of the places that we work, we can't share with the government and industry folks any information about the plants, because it's very protected knowledge. So one of the things that we've been doing is gathering all of that information with the community researchers, and then looking at it from a perspective of the ecosystem and the community, and then giving the operators, or in this case, I guess it's a transmission line. So giving them a summary of saying, you have these different grasslands and forests along your transmission line. If you take those out, we're going to lose key important species. But we won't necessarily tell them what they're used for, or even the name of the species in some cases. So there's quite a bit of pressure on medicinal and food plants, but it's hard. You can get funding through these industry processes for some of that work as well.
Any questions? Yes.
Focus on the Wolverine, today's anybody else doing studies on it?
Traditional knowledge studies? I know of one other traditional knowledge study.
We got a special trappers program, and they recorded actually last year. One wolverine was killed by trap. It was trapped by one trapper. So just it's very abundance is very scarce in our territory, but we just try to collect so much information. So, for example, location when it was trapped, how big is this? Try to collect extra, but usually people record that they have no idea what kind of animals it is. So it's a very unusual species in our territory.
The terminologies for native names for these animals are I'm finding a hard time finding others now to help us and assist these habitats that were recognized by 50 years ago. They saw these, and what I found out is in my language is you know what? But we know he's one of the endangered species. So,
Actually, it's considered an endangered species in Ontario. Actually, you know what? I got same problem with fish. And in 2011, I make a poster, like all fish from Mushkegowuk territory. And I include some exotic species, some invaders. And we try to translate it to English in Cree. And people who translate it say, we don't have name of this fish. Catfish, we never catch any catfish in our waters, but now we can see more and more catfish. Smallmouth bass also have no name in Cree language for smallmouth bass. So some another minnows we got it. So no names. So only picture and English name. And they say, how has this happened? It's why it's my territory got invaded by new species. I say, well, probably global warming. So we got same problem. We got, for example, I got phone call from people from Pewanik, and they say, how you can, what kind of species it is? And they send me a picture of robin, bird. And I say, it's located in Pewanik. And they got hard time to name it, this bird. So, how we can say, yes.
you could go to the Anishinaabe in New Brunswick or Maine, Passamaquoddy, and get their names for those species and take it back over. Because at some point there may have been some discussion between people that traveled, and if you can get the names in the Anishinaabe language that's in another location where those species are, and bring it back, you may be able to find someone that would recognize that.
Yeah,
name.
well, it's possible. It's possible. Biggest problem, we got two dialects in our territory, L and N. So it's sometimes they don't understand each other.
I don't know, I have from actually because people in northern British Columbia and Alberta that are Anishinaabe. Same
Probably,
language,
it's
or
possible, but I'm not sure.
When I'll just speak on the wolverine, when we were doing some studies, it was interesting because the trappers really didn't want to see the wolverines on the trap lines because oftentimes that would mean there wouldn't really be anything else there. And so it's not a surprise that it's called a monster, but I guess that when they would really remember about when there was a wolverine because of the fact that they decimated all of the other animals that they would have been trapping, and then they would have to get rid of the wolverine so that they could keep on trapping. So the wolverine, I mean, this is one of the things that when you look at cultural important species and harvested species, when a species is designated as a species at risk, you're not supposed to trap it or hunt it. In this case, if you didn't trap that wolverine out, you wouldn't use your trap line anymore, right? So that's a cultural impact of that species being designated. And then in other instances where you've eaten caribou, and caribou have maybe a really important medicinal purpose, but they're designated so you can't hunt them anymore. This idea of what is a sustainable population is set by biologists, but they don't consider food and cultural practices like trapping and hunting in how they do their designation or in how they set regulations. You had a question?
Yeah, I was just curious, like Derek on the phone, first issue, you say you found the study on the something.
Yes.
Curious what the word was.
Blackfin cisco. It's a threatened species in Ontario, but I was working for Royal Ontario Museum, and I got for identification. They say it's really strange looking cisco we caught in the Ogoki River by OPG. And when we try to identify it, we come into blackfin cisco. It's threatened species. It's protected species, but it's supposed to be local population in Ogoki River. It's tributary of Albany. It's a little bit outside of Mushkegowuk territory, but It's same watershed. It's a new swimming for Martin Falls, guys. Yes.
Or you got another? One of our operator kind of First Nations for Tribal Council, and one of our communities, Muskrat Dam, has seen deer just south of Muskrat Dam Lake. That's coming pretty far north now.
I was going to ask about that too, if anyone, with all the caribou studies, has anybody ever studied the deer as an invasive species, like counteracting the caribou effects? Whatever way, but I don't know if deer populations have been studied that far north either.
Historically, Mushkegowuk territory doesn't have deer population. But last year, it was recorded 7 deers in close to Moose River, close to Moosonee. They recorded tracks, they recorded a number of animals they counted. Nobody hunted them, so. But they moved north. And now close to Timmins, they actually recorded some deer population. It was never recorded before. So it's moving north right now. But
As far as the specific studies, I'm not sure which area studies are being done. Again, because it's a very common species, it's not going to be studied. It's not going to be a prioritized study, but in the caribou, yes. So when you're looking at caribou, the deer don't use the same habitat that the caribou use, but the deer and the moose increase the wolf populations. So as you get more moose and more deer, the wolf populations will go up, and there will be increased wolf pressure on the caribou as well. So they do have an interactive effect, even though they don't eat the same food. But the climate change and industry are probably the biggest factors. So the deer will have more browse. The more transmission lines there are, the more open habitat with grasslands, and even for the moose, right? The forestry, all the shrubs and the browse, there's lots of food created and available, and it's bringing up the wolves. So, oh my goodness, when we were out monitoring this summer along the river, the Mattawa River, we saw wolf tracks every time we pulled our boat over. There was timber wolf tracks. So, that's going to be a lot of pressure on the caribou, and that's partly related to an increase in deer. But I don't think it's well understood. And this morning, when the speakers were talking about seeing changes in animals and species, this is one of the ones. Deer is one of the ones that I think we should be having an eye on, and nobody's going to be looking at them. But we might be relying heavily on them, because some places where we're working, we've seen as much as a 70% decrease in moose populations in 1 year. They're crashing, and the deer are coming in. So we're going to need to understand that better.
I think there's also the challenge with the meningeal worm. They bring with them parasites and diseases that are detrimental to both moose and caribou.
Yes.
So in Ontario, the Sylvan ecological zones has been one way so the province has tried to manage multiple ungulates, multiple species of moose, deer, and caribou together. And I just don't think that that's a place that's very thoughtful with respect to what's happening, particularly in the final world around climate change, with these animals having, finding better habitat, and then eventually out-competing some of the existing creatures, First Nations and others care about.
But, this is always that question about whether, because I can't remember, who was saying, maybe it was either Simon or David, I can't remember which one said it, but that these things are interactive. I think it was David. That these factors are interactive. So climate change will have shifts in and of itself, right? So warmer summers, earlier springs, there's more food available, animals are going to start to shift And that's going to be interactive with the forestry and the logging and the industrial changes, and then there's going to be the parasites and the insects. So it's all, it all plays in together, and it's difficult to tease out one specific contribution into that system.
Why do they want our TEK? I don't understand.
Why?
Yeah.
Well,
Why do
TEK
they want
is also knowledge.
Why
It's
they want to
also
know?
based on observation.
Why they want to know about where our plants are?
Well, because
where our
Western
campsites are, where our hunting grounds are, where we hunt calves and eggs and all that stuff. Why do we do that? Why do they want to know that?
Okay, maybe I can start.
Oh, yeah.
Well, TEK got multiple applications in management. First of all, from general observation, it's TEK is also science. It's Western science. It's you can put some equipment in the field. You can take some data, and you analyze it. TEK is absolutely the same, but you don't put equipment. You make your personal observation, collect it, and share it with other people. So, and just timing, like TEK is mostly long-term study from many years. You see changes, you can see behavior of animals, water, everything. Western science also make observation, but much shorter period. So TEK, it's very valuable source of information, for especially management purposes. This is why they need your knowledge about your camping grounds, hunting routes, and everything. So for management, well,
I would just say that's an interesting observation, that it's for management, but I would go one step further and say, if you develop your own management strategy for your community, they don't need your TEK, right? So if you say to the province, yes, you guys are doing your studies on caribou, we've done our own study, and we want to protect these areas for caribou in our territory based on our knowledge, right? Or we need to protect this area because it's important for our culture. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to give, or that the province needs your information. So there's two different ways you can do it. One, you can share the information and they can make a management decision about it. The other is use the information, write up a direction based on that traditional knowledge, and give it back and say, yes, we've done our traditional knowledge study, and here's what we want to see done. So this is something we did in the oil sands with the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation. They did a bunch of TEK studies, and they wrote a guideline for government and industry based on the traditional knowledge, never having to share the knowledge itself, just saying, here's what it means, and they identified areas for industrial development and areas where there was going to be only hunting and protection for rights, for practice of rights. So not protection in the way that the province thinks of it, which is don't go there, don't hunt there, but protection for the practice of rights for traditional hunting and trapping areas. So I think that Alex is right that the best use of the information is for management, but it begs the question of management by who. And you know, in my understanding, the government that's sovereign over that territory should make the management recommendations.
Any other questions?
We have about 10 minutes left until break. So we do have a couple more questions, but we've pretty much answered them
Yes.
in some form or another. I know Carolyn and Bertha have some pictures, and you have some pieces
Yes, well, if somebody interested, I got some, in 2010 we conducted a lake sturgeon PCB study, contamination study in Moose Creek territory. We collected information about metal mercury, heavy metals, pesticides, PCB, everything from different locations of lake sturgeon, and make a decision, management decision, what we recommend local, like First Nation community people to eat, what limitation of like food limitations, what advisory we'll give to local communities. Actually, advisory was fit with management practice that already Moose Creek implemented. So we found out that specific size of lake sturgeon is much safer to eat than any other. And usually it's like First Nation people say, it tastes better. This kind of fish, this size tastes better. But I just make one recommendation for community, not to overfish. Just say, okay guys, if you catch 5 fish, take 1, release 4. Not everybody follow it, but just some people do. Yes?
Go back to the caribou. Is that a study about the effects on deer canning?
Yes, it was done.
So that was a study that was based.
Actually, this study was done in Chapel Crown Game Preserve. Chapel Crown Game Preserve was studied in 2007. And right a year before I came to work. And they say it's when you have clear cutting, or especially for woodland caribou. Woodland caribou try to move in more wooded area, so they try to be protected more. They become more like scared or spooked much easier. They stop eating food in the open areas. Especially if you have equipment working close by, they're really scared of noise. So it was a major finding for our studies. I'm not sure it's how it fits with your study. Did you find any specific? Or
Is that an impact or
Have clear cuts?
Clear cuts, yeah.
impacts on caribou on deer cutting?
Well, in the studies that we were doing, the caribou were seen more before the clear cutting and not seen in the areas after the clear cutting. The knowledge holders that we interviewed said that it's those things that Alex mentioned, and also but it has to do with their food too, because the food that they're eating is a lichen most often, and it's slow to grow, and it's not going to be in the clear cuts. The other thing is that the caribou don't like to travel through open areas. They don't like to stay out in the open areas, and so they're like not likely going to be moving across there, because the way that they get away from wolves is either in the forest or in wet muskegee areas that the moose can't run, or the wolves can't run in. So there's the clear cuts. It depends on where they are, really, on how much they affect the caribou.
So we gotta say more muskeg to see where caribou?
Yeah,
Yes.
they like the muskeg.
Yes.
Well, that's just what we're finding, right? That they like the muskegee areas with, they like a combination, right? Because what people are saying is they like these what we found is they like these old forest patches where there's old forest and then muskeg beside it. And we went to view them this summer. It's just like Stanley described to us. You know, there's these nice open muskegee areas, and there's lots of lichen in the forest beside it.
Yes.
That's all.
Just a comment, I went to a forestry management planning in Timmins a couple of months ago, and since we're talking about EEA here, our people that didn't have a clue what I was talking about. I was quite surprised by it because when we're talking our consultation with the local M&R, they're well aware of what PK is, but at the regional level, we're right over their heads. I don't know how you get them people to look at TEK and give it the same weight as the Western Science Section said, and apply to the hydrodevelopment when you're doing studies that TEK give it the same weight. So I don't know how you get that message across to the provincial bureau that these guys are from the Peterborough offices. You know, you
Peterborough offices
here with all kinds of TEK knowledge, and yet it's not being applied anyplace else in Fourth Street.
Well, Peterborough office is completely different than local offices. Usually, any project, right now we got environmental assessment, it's supposed to be included TEK study. Like local communities that are affected by this project. Well, it's a requirement. I don't know why we didn't know that. It's really surprised me.
But I mean, that's what we were saying earlier today, right? Because even in the Species at Risk Act, it says that they have to consider traditional knowledge and cultural values in the Species at Risk process, and they don't. And they really don't. And there's not a single Indigenous person on their science committee of 12 people. So I don't know how they can be. Well, I mean, you're right. You know, one way that I would recommend, and that I have seen working, is for band councils to say, you can't come into our territory. I mean, it's the same thing with consultation. Court cases are being won across the country where government or industry try to go ahead with a forest management plan or any other project without adequate consultation. It does not stand up in court. And they're learning the hard way. And it's an expensive process, but if the band councils push back and say, you're not going to be able to move forward with this unless we follow this process or this protocol, it's a good way to get it clear to them that this is our process, and here's how you have to consider our information.
Now, I just want to say already, and go over again here, most of the things I've been doing, and I've been serving our area myself. No industry just recognizes anything what we're doing. We must be doing something wrong, but we don't recognize it. They want to go ahead and do what they want to do. Do their industrial work and mining, any other exploration or timber harvesting and all that. And they were going to work, and we were told we were supposed to finish a understanding first before everything started to happen. But right now, it's just you want to go ahead and do what they want to. And don't seem to give a damn for what they're doing and what they're protecting our area. They're right, go ahead and do what they want to do. That's the way I explain it myself. When I'm going to say that, I don't know how we're going to ever protect the species at risk when we're talking. Because they're talking about also some kind of water and electrical water, damming or something like that. Whatever kind of time they want to start doing somewhere in our area. And that's going to impact waterways as well for species at risk, like what you're talking about, sturgeon or any other species. So I don't know where else we can go for it. And you can do all studies you want to, and then are they going to go, are they going to listen to whatever you're going to find out about it? What's this? No, I hear in Army River, and there's a time to go something in that area. I don't know that. I cannot really see it in here, but I'm not certain about that. So now, there's a mining company, same thing. Something